Welcome. My name is Ellie Gold. I'm the president of the Gold Institute for International Strategy. With me today, I have three of our institute's law enforcement fellows: Mark Black, retired NYPD; Martin Johnson, retired Howard County police officer; and Larry Cunningham, retired Secret Service. Each one of our guests here today, one of our panelists, each one in some way, shape, or form continues in their work, in their law enforcement roles, and in most cases, training other law enforcement across the country and possibly even across the globe. Today's conversation is really regarding an executive order that President Biden signed on May 25th. And this is on the anniversary of the death of George Floyd. This is a 2-year anniversary. The executive order on advancing effective, accountable policing and criminal justice practices to enhance public trust and public safety. It really was, in my opinion, quite poor timing on the president, as this was in the shadow of the mass murder at a school in Uvalde, Texas. 19 children, two teachers were killed the following day. An important topic to discuss. The other question is, why was this an executive order? Why wasn't this passed through Congress? And it appears as though they didn't have the votes to pass this through Congress, so therefore we had to pass it or bring it as an executive order by the president. So let me just throw it to the panelists just to give their initial thoughts on it, and then we'll go back into a discussion. So Mark, let's start with you. Initial thoughts on this executive order that signed by the president the day after this attack in Texas.
Thank you, and thank you very much for being here, my distinguished colleagues. After going over this executive order on policing that was recently signed off on by the Biden administration, it seems like it's reinventing the wheel once again. And some other points about this is what caught my attention was the establishing of a national law enforcement accountability database. That really stuck out for many, many reasons. I wonder at that point, they want an accountability database in police reforms. But with that particularly, I'm not a constitutional attorney, but does that basically step on the rights of states, because we're dealing with state and local employees who are now going to be put into a federal database? And then I'm concerned about the slippery slope. Are they going to go to have teachers next in the database who do wrong, doctors in the national database? Where does it stop? So there's a lot of open-ended questions here. And I think it's kind of contradictory. They talk in the executive order about attracting individuals into law enforcement. But if anybody is interested in law enforcement or has families who are already or friends in law enforcement, they really need to take a read of this to fully understand. This seems in some ways to be, as I said, we're reinventing the wheel again. A lot of things in here are being done. A lot of things are politically charged in here, as you always hear the discourse between the police and the community, which I have to say, and I really have to say, working in some very rough neighborhoods, middle-class neighborhoods, and very wealthy neighborhoods coming from New York City, the only people to seem to have a problem with the police are the bad guys or the people who want to basically play politics with law enforcement. The people who need the police want the police there. And this bill just exasperates and just puts a little more, to me, a little more fire into the politics, but really doesn't address what the real needs are of law enforcement today.
Thank you, Mark. Martin, let's go to you.
Thank you, Ellie, and to my colleagues. Glad we could all get together and talk about this. This is important. I have the printout right here, and I wanted to go to the third paragraph. And here it says that we've collectively mourned following law enforcement encounters that have tragically ended in the loss of life. Now, when it's quite obvious that this is not referring to the loss of life of the officers, because this is talking about how in the whole 27 pages, what it talks about is police accountability, which is fine, by the way. Cops want to be accountable. Cops want other cops to be accountable throughout the entire industry of policing. That's fine with us. But here it says that these law enforcement encounters that have tragically ended in loss of life, most of which are preventable, completely preventable, and not on the part of the police. It's on the part of the person who's dealing with the police. So when a person is being arrested and they don't submit to arrest, then violence occurs. And the violence is usually started by the suspect, the person who's being arrested. It's preventable in that we need to make sure that when people are being arrested or stopped by the police for whatever particular reason, that they're cooperative. And nobody's saying that you have to, empty your pockets in front of the police just because they stop you or anything like that. But so much of what goes into this, particularly further on in the document, relates to police accountability, use of force. There's a lot of use of force going on in here. And so my point is that most of the time, most is 51% or greater, most of the time, when people get hurt or die, horrible as it might be, during an arrest situation or a detention or an incarceration situation, it's preventable if the person just did what we asked.
Thank you, Martin. Larry?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm struck by the timing, but let's get back to the actual text. I looked it over as well, and my colleagues have addressed some points that had me concerned. My initial reaction, and I'm saying this in the purest bipartisan, objective way that I can, is I'm struck by some of the political overtones. Many of the things they're talking about were not vetted properly. It appears that it was sort of a shotgun gut reaction to something filled with emotion without really looking at what is in place currently for accountability, police procedures, and then what the long-term goal of this. I'm struck by a couple of things in general. I'll talk about specifics maybe later, but in general, we're talking about trying to protect the public here. This is what they want to do. They want to appease the concern about police and help them do a better job on the surface, supposedly. But many of the elements in here aren't really accomplishing that. They're kind of further dividing the line between the police and the community. Another thing I'm struck with that many folks may not be as privy to, I am, because I was in a federal agency. I worked with many of the agencies represented by my colleagues, NYPD, local police in Maryland, as well as across the planet, frankly. And I can tell you, in the United States, there is a little bit of a one-upmanship and a little bit of antagonism, if you will, a little bit of distrust between federals and locals. On the individual basis, we try to bridge that gap. Relationships make the biggest difference. But the element that probably has me more concerned than any is the idea that Biden would like to deputize, or shall I say, establish an oversight group of federal folks to monitor the procedures and protocols and institutional knowledge and culture of local police in the performance of their duties. To me, that is going to divide things even further. Candidly, we need to be one. We need to be a team. And to have sort of a quote unquote watchdog overseeing police operations at a local level, it to me is further dividing the ability for police to do their work, law enforcement to do their work. So that has me very concerned. And I'm telling you that not from an article I read. In humility, I'll explain to everyone, I'm working on my 49th year in this arena. I was in law enforcement for 20 years with the Secret Service. Most of what I did, I relied on local police, regardless of what the issue or the mission was. And it was a broad issue, broad range. Since that time, I have worked almost exclusively with local police, whether I'm teaching, doing security surveys, premises liability cases. And I can tell you the institutional knowledge of a police officer, a police department in a community is invaluable. To have this element to oversee something that really they have no knowledge of is going to further exacerbate the entire process. So that's one thing, and I felt very strongly I wanted to mention, because I've worked with folks across the planet, and candidly, we should not be getting involved in someone's house. We can assist if requested, but to start dictating how protocols and procedures should be done and behavior should be mandated by a federal oversight committee that really knows not that much about it, it is just, to me, very, very troublesome.
Thank you, Larry. I have a question for each of you, and then maybe we can, then after we go through those, we can all jump in and comment on any of the questions, or if you have your own thoughts, please. But Larry, let's go with you. Do you see this as a stepping stone towards federalizing the police force?
I do, and candidly, that's probably one of the most worrisome things. I can give you a little context here. The National Response Plan prior to Katrina and many other emergencies in the United States basically said that the federals would come in, the federal police and federal agents would come in and kind of assist, but it was more like they would direct. And that was very troublesome. And we saw how that went in many instances. So frankly, the idea that that would even be in the offing or implicit in this is even more disturbing, because frankly, I would not want anyone in a outside agency without the requisite experience and the hands-on local cultural experience to be dictating how an emergency should be run. They have no idea how the equipment it goes, what the relationships are among the various responders and the community. To me, I think it spells disaster. So yes, in the back of my mind, Ellie and my colleagues, I'm concerned about that, because I believe that may be paving the way, and thus why it was an executive order and not vetted properly as something this important should be.
Why do you think that we can't have a federal set of standards, but not but leaving it to the local authorities? We have that. Not, I mean, in my own opinion, we need to get rid of the Department of Education, but that's a topic for a different conversation, for a different time. But we have these federal guidelines, educational guidelines, but it's left to the states and the localities. Why can't we do this here, Larry?
Well, I think we can, and I think we've done some of that in the past. But frankly, and again, I'm trying to be as objective as I can,
Sure.
and keeping Democrats, Republicans, liberals, and conservatives out of it. What I'm talking about is just brass tacks, organizational structures, and how things work. Frankly, let's go into a sports arena. And I often say in many of my classes that we really heavily rely on the public, because they know their neighborhoods, they know their houses, they know their organizations. So to have someone come in, regardless of their credibility and their accomplishments, to have a coach or someone that thinks they know a lot about football, for example, to come into a pre-Super Bowl game and discuss how things should go. how the interaction should be, look at some of the plays, which are literally this analogy is direct, and suggest that they do different plays. To me, that is not only presumptuous, it's arrogant, and it's obtuse. There's no way in heck you can come in from an outside without the benefit of years of institutional knowledge, years of developing relationships that have cultural nuances, and think that you're going to have any success other than aggravate the situation. So I hope I answered that question, Ellie. Do you want me to
Yeah,
expand on that a little bit?
No, absolutely. No, excellent. Thank you. Mark, you were talking about the executive order having a lot of redundancies. There are things that are already being done. What are some of those things that are already being done that are in this executive order, as if they are not?
Well, for one, reaching out to the community. I mean, a lot of it had to do with how we're going to reach out to the community. Law enforcement is already reaching out to the community. I mean, that's already being done. With respect to the military equipment, the police are not getting bayonets. They're not. They're getting tactical vehicles or getting tactical protection, such as maybe body armor that is needed. And these things are already being done. But something very important that Larry hit upon, and it's kind of what I stated before, and this is so important about federalizing the police, and that's the way I interpreted this. Penal laws are different. They might vary from state to state, and also from our independent sovereign lands such as Puerto Rico or Guam. How are there going to be oversight? And then we can even drill down even lower. We can then go into our large cities, which might have even differences in the penal law or in ordinances. Who's going to oversight that? And here's a question that needs to be asked, especially establishing the National Law Enforcement Accountability Database. What's misconduct? Misconduct. Define it from a police perspective. What is it? It can be different from the patrol guides or the police guides that are at every individual police academy across the United States. So there already is a database. If a police officer, like any other civilian in the United States, commits a felony, commits a misdemeanor, it is there during background checks. They will be already flagged. Misconduct can be something as simple as this particular diner, no police officer for whatever reason, an off-limits location, went in there and got a cup of coffee, and then they're fired from their job because they did that. It had nothing to do with breaking the law. It had to do with breaking a policy that individual police department had. So that is very vague. What is the definition of misconduct? And that's why I said, I'm not a constitutional attorney, but if you're going to make a national database of local and state law enforcement, isn't that an overreach for the federal government? Because that individual is a state representative.
Right. Good point. But Martin, we talk about these double standards. We talk about the double standards that we have, and going along the lines of what Larry was talking about and Mark was talking about, and in your comments also, these are numbers that I didn't ask you to bring with today, so you may not know. But what are the numbers of people killed by police versus police killed by people? And yes, I know police are people too. But I'm talking about civilians. What do you know the disparity in numbers on that?
Yeah, you're right. I don't happen to know that immediately. I can tell you though. Here's something that probably didn't make it to the news, and it is that in the month of March alone, every 3 days on average, a law enforcement officer was killed, murdered, purposely killed by a bad guy. Not car crashes, not COVID, some bad guy purposely killed a law enforcement officer on average every 72 hours. 10 law enforcement officers, 30 days, 10 law enforcement officers in March were killed by bad guys being bad, intentionally killed. So, I don't have the statistics on me, right this second, but we have to bear this in mind. Now, tell me, if 10 perfectly innocent people were, and I'm going to be facetious, please understand, I'm being sarcastic. If 10 people were gunned down by the police who went out hunting for them, if that happened 10 times or every 72 hours in March, wouldn't we have heard about it? It seems that the few who scream the loudest, no matter how much of an obvious tantrum they are throwing, without justification, hands up, don't shoot, total nonsense, never happened. President Obama's Justice Department said that never really happened, but we still have it. So much of this is, and I can't go to the specific numbers, but so much of this is perception. And the perception is what's put out there for consumption. So how many, 10 cops were intentionally killed in March. I don't know how many people were intentionally killed by the police in March. I would suspect 0.
Right.
So
It's interesting. It's interesting if we're going to use, this executive order was specifically signed on the 2nd anniversary after of the George Floyd death. And there was an agenda here, without a doubt. So let's go back to what we're talking about as we speak right now, and that is the double standards. So if we're going to, we're focused on this database, but in reality, there's so much to unpack just on this one aspect of this, and we're having a database because of to hold law enforcement accountable. But again, not picking George Floyd out of a basket of many. I'm picking George Floyd as the premise for this executive order as put out by the White House. If we were to pull up his database rap sheet, just of the equivalent of the law enforcement officers database rap sheet, his is quite extensive. Is there a double standard, and at what point in time, Mark, to your point, Martin or Larry, feel free to jump in. Mark, to your point from other times, other conversations that we've had, at what point in time are we interested in joining law enforcement? Why would I want to get a job as an NYPD police officer, a Howard County police officer, or even a Secret Service officer who's who has a larger role? Thoughts?
Well, that's why in the order, it says that it wants to help assist in recruiting individuals to go into the vocation of law enforcement and policing. But who in their right mind today, looking at the climate in policing and law enforcement, would want to go into it? I would right now, I would tell young people I wouldn't even go there. It's too politically charged right now. Let's look. We have to go back several years ago to the George Floyd, and then we have to look at the BLM movement for defunding the police. The whole movement wasn't really to take money away, because as we know, budgets can come and go. The whole reality of the movement was to actually decrease manpower in law enforcement departments and police departments across the United States, which has become very, very successful. Now the Biden administration, or people in our federal government on whatever side of the aisle they may be on, are now trying to walk those steps back, and through the executive order put wording in there, we're going to assist the police departments in recruiting. Well, too bad. Guess what? As the pun goes, you shot yourself in the foot. You can't call it back, because nobody in their right mind is going to join right now. And if they are joining and they are going through the process, the joke I made is then they should fail the psych exam right away, because they don't have a true understanding of what's happening there on the streets. I still have friends who are very active, who are active in law enforcement, and what we have today is inactive policing, not proactive policing. And what is happening now is, as I stated before, that this is basically reinventing the wheel for more oversight.
Sure.
More and more oversight, whereby an individual who is on the streets right now does not want to be proactive. And this will take years and years and years to come undone. I do not personally believe it's an executive order. I do not personally believe that this executive order is going to last. It
Well,
might have lasted under the Biden administration, but I don't see it going forward that it's going to last, because what's happening now is even a lot of cities such as New York City are starting to see the backlash of all of this, and people from all different social economic backgrounds want policing to come back into the communities. And they're starting to realize the one thing that they do not have control over, they don't, is in recruiting, because you can't force a person to join the ranks and files of a department. And if you need police on the streets for the safety of the community and to strengthen the tax base, it's kind of already too late. And that's why a lot of people are backtracking this.
Larry,
Ellie, may I
yeah, please.
comment? Yes, I'm struck by this. I reread briefly the order this morning. I'm listening to the comments of everyone. And you've triggered the basis, Ellie, for my critique of this.
Mhm.
Frankly, it is, the timing appears political, okay? The fact that it's on the second anniversary of the George Floyd arrest and death. Biden claims, and his administration claim, they want to unify. They want to strengthen the relationship between police and the public and make their jobs more efficient. I'm looking at this and candidly, this whole thing starts out with the beginning of contradictions. The entire thing is filled with contradictions. They can't have it both ways. For example, it says more broadly, numerous aspects of our criminal justice system are still shaped by race and ethnicity. Wow. So he's saying by taking this critical step, he wants to strengthen our democracy and strengthen the relationship and strengthen trust specifically between law enforcement officers and the communities they serve. And then he's saying that there are lasting obstacles and so forth. He's talking about how there are shortages and staffing issues and so forth. He's talking about holding perpetrators accountable. But quite honestly, everything he's done, as you read down in the specifics of the order, completely contradicts those things. Not only that, whoever wrote this, and I'm confident he had no idea, no input on this because he has no idea, quite candidly. Some staffer who never really understood what public safety means, never really understood what a general security and safety system should look like, let alone what rank and file police and fire and emergency responders do, wrote this. It's complete ideology. It's fairy tale land. So they're basically saying all these things, yet they're making it more and more difficult for an officer to respond normally. This officer, this responder, this fire person is going to be in the back of their mind saying, wait a minute, they're taking my funding away. They're making me more accountable. As it stands right now, well before this order, I've talked to many officers, as my colleagues have, and there is a real chill in terms of how to respond. There's a real concern that, wait a minute, should I ask for ID at this point, or am I going to be scrutinized? Do I have enough probable cause in my training and experience to make an arrest? But wait a minute, the prosecutors are going to second guess this. And because many of our leaders, it's reality, I've had them, are political animals often, they're going to kowtow to the political climate. So looking at all these things and all the obstacles up to this point that all law enforcement and public safety has, all this executive order has done, frankly, is added more obstacles, more scrutiny, and frankly, more concern in terms of, will they respond wholeheartedly? Will they hesitate? And in some of these cases, hesitation means life and death to everybody concerned. So I think this is nothing more than a political statement capitalizing on some of the momentum from, and it's ill-advised, candidly, from the Floyd issue and many others, because many other, Trayvon Martin, many others are listed and referred to. Frankly, I think that it wants it both ways, but it's basically done nothing except exacerbate and created a further divide at many levels. One last point. The other naivete here is that many of the organizations and many of the protocols and frankly, mechanisms that are involved in police work in terms of proactively identifying these things and maybe neutralizing something before it becomes an issue have been taken away. Much of the detective squad in New York, for example, and I'm sure Mark can address that. So really, this is, for lack of a better statement here in summary, it's a political statement, I believe. They're trying to appease their voter base, who we've seen, frankly, a large part of them have caused more problems for police. They don't understand it. And then they go ahead and say, well, to appease the police, well, we're going to support you and give you the equipment, holding perpetrators accountable. But the reality is it's not doing that. So frankly, it's a contradiction, and now it's almost fraudulent.
Martin, do you think that the creation of if we were to follow this executive order to a T and create these federal databases and so on and so forth, as Larry and Mark indicated, that this was clearly written by somebody who is living in a different world, in a bureaucratic world versus a law enforcement world. Are you concerned that bureaucrats will be creating our law enforcement from a distant land, as Ronald Reagan talked about it, off in Washington, rather than actually collaborating with law enforcement on a local level?
The answer is yes. And what I read all 27 pages of this, every word of it. What it does, what this EO, the executive order, does is it orders federal agencies to do particular things. But right on page 8, it says the Attorney General shall encourage state, tribal, local, and territorial law enforcement agencies to contribute, and this was in particular to the accountability database. And then if you go to page 25, section 20, it says that the Attorney General, Secretary of Homeland Security, and HHS, basically they have to award federal discretionary grants in a manner that supports and promotes the adoption of policies of this order by tribal, state, local, territorial governments, et cetera. So what they're doing is they're saying, okay, look, the president's saying in this, I can tell you federal guys what to do, and this is what I'm going to make you do. Now, we're also going to just make some financial decisions on how much we're going to give in grants and also it said technical or training assistance. We're going to withhold money, technical or training assistance, from the states and locals unless they do exactly what we tell them to do. So this really does, this is, I hate to use a colloquialism, this is, to me, this is the camel's nose under the tent. The camel just keeps going, the camels don't back out. So what I'm seeing is it's a creeping incrementalism attack method to nationalize policing.
Are we nationalizing the diversity committee when it comes to law enforcement, Martin?
Oh, I think, yeah, I think if things like this continue, and I'm sure that there are people in smoke-filled rooms with whichever kind of smoke they're smoking. But there are people in these rooms and they've got these 10-year plans, these 20-year plans. And I think this is one of the steps along the way to the 10, 20, 30-year plan of exactly that, of creating this national set of standards. That standards are not bad on their own. That standards are fine. We hold each other to standards, and in the police world, we hold officers and anybody who works for us to certain standards, and that's fine. And I don't suggest for a moment that we should not hold everyone to certain standards, foundational standards, but we can do that on the federal, state, tribal, local level. We don't need the Attorney General saying, hey, you got to do this, do it, or no technical training or money assistance comes your way.
So
Right.
may I add one comment?
Yeah, please.
Actually, two things. Absolutely. That is a sort of a theme that's spread throughout all these elements in this order. And frankly, they stack the deck to enforce, or shall I say, to make these things come true for them, i.e., frankly, getting their base to vote for them, which is really, let's be honest, there's a lot of that in here. They've sort of orchestrated the rules to ensure that that happens. So, I mean, candidly, let's be honest. I'm not jaded. I've been around a while, 48 years in this business. I've been around policymakers and so forth. And I'm becoming more concerned as a citizen, as a law enforcement professional, and frankly, as a patriot. So having said that, this is a problem because they've orchestrated money, which is an incredible lever to get all this to happen. Part two, which is, to me, smacks me in the face so hard. It is an executive order. It had no opportunity to be vetted. Conspicuously absent from this, completely absent, are any hard data, no studies. I mean, no empirical thought process, cause effect. It's completely devoid here. And that is a terrible problem. I mean, you can almost, if you read it a little more carefully and think of the background, I mean, you can see the emotion spilling into this. They have catchphrases, but there is no hard data, no empirical cause effect thinking. To me, that's a terrible problem with such a sweeping order.
Very good points. I am going to, in the description on this video, I'm going to have the link posted there so everybody can read these two documents. One is the executive order itself, and one is really the talking points that was produced by the White House, so you can review it for yourself. This video is not meant to be a to debate the issue. This video here, this conversation here, is to get the perspective of law enforcement. The White House was clear, and they did a very good job at providing the other side of the other perspective. Now this video here is to hear from our fellows as to law enforcement's perspective on this. I want to ask, before we wrap up, I do want to ask a question. And Mark, let's go to you on this. But anybody can jump in, as you know. As we look at this larger issue of policing and the interaction that police have with the people on the ground, these civilians, in the George Floyd case, he was I guess he was high at the time. He had an extensive rap sheet as well. The interaction between law enforcement and the individual, how big of a how much does the district attorney in that city, whatever city that may be, play a role in law enforcement?
Are you talking about whether the perpetrator had many contacts with police?
This is a generic.
Well,
question.
you have to understand the DAs. Okay, New York City has 5 different DAs for the 5 different boroughs.
Okay.
So you have a different political mindset for each different borough.
Okay.
Now, with that being said, if the first thing that an ADA, the assistant district attorney, will ask is, about the general arrest, and then they'll look at priors. Has this individual, this perpetrator, how many times has he made contact with the courts, the criminal court system, and how many times has he or she made contact with police, and what types of crimes were committed before? Are we talking about petty crimes or real violent crimes? And then, of course, was there any restitution or any jail time, and are they a recidivist? So that's all taken into consideration. The question then becomes, is this case going to become something that's going to be political? It's going to have media attention, not only locally, regionally, and nationally. That's when things, when you start to get the press involved and the politicians involved, then there becomes what I call down pressure from the district attorney, who's basically a political head of the prosecutor's office, down to the ADA, who's actually prosecuting the case in court, down to that detective or police officer who actually conducted the investigation and or made the arrest. And then what is the vibe of the community of that arrest and how it went down. And the way that I think that you're seeing some pushback is a lot of people in the United States, Joe citizen, Jane citizen, one, do not understand the penal law, do not understand their constitutional rights, do not understand, with respect to policing and law enforcement, the force life cycle, the force cycle, which is used, and things get strewed, and there's a lot of false information out there. So, and that false information is taken advantage of by people in very powerful positions within our judicial system, which are in our law enforcement community as well. So I think when we see these contacts between the DA's offices and the police department, though we always hear separate but equal, we arrest. Now, it might be different with the federals on a federal end, but for us with NYPD, we're a local law enforcement. We can arrest on probable cause. We can arrest on probable cause. Will it go to court? Will they DP it, decline prosecution? That's a totally different issue, and that's up to the ADA. And Larry can talk more about how the feds handle their investigations, but us, we don't have somebody, a district attorney might be running the case or oversight. If I have a case and I might touch base with an ADA, this is what I'm doing, but you're not going to tell me when I can and when I can't arrest somebody if I have the probable cause. So it might be a little different on the federal end and how that's perceived. And that's something that Larry can probably talk more to.
Well, I guess my point is, the point of my question, you may have answered it, is if you as a member of law enforcement know that this guy is not going to be prosecuted, am I even going to bother chasing him down?
Well, see, then that's not up to you. If a crime is committed in front of you and there's probable cause to arrest, and someone says that guy did this, this, and this, and you have probable cause, you have to arrest, because then the officer or the investigator brings liability onto themselves for not doing the arrest. Because what happens if that individual, if you say, okay, nothing's going to happen, but I know I had probable cause to arrest, it was done in front of XYZ citizen, they witnessed it, but you know what, nothing's going to happen. But then that individual commits a real hideous crime, that's going to fall back. So there's liability on the police officers that they have to arrest if they see something in front of them or they're doing the investigation. I dealt with a lot of child crimes. We arrested. It's going to be up to the district attorney's office. When I say office, I'm not talking about the DA themselves, the assistant district attorney, whether they're going to arrest or not. Now, here's a double-edged sword. And another thing is, when you have that DP, what we call decline prosecution, and what we're seeing now with the bail reforms, and we see kind of this in this executive order, giving a little more, shall I say, power to the perpetrator, that then can lead to the officer being sued. They're like, oh, you arrest me on probable cause, but the district attorney office, the ADA, this decline prosecution. So that's another thing that goes behind the minds of the investigators that are doing these crimes. So on the federal level, it might be a little different the way that they have to interact with the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I'm talking from a local level with NYPD, the way we had to. And all these things are going through the minds of investigators and police officers right now. It's just not a matter of, oh, I'm going to pull out my weapon if I have to use of force. There's other things here that are coming into play that are not allowing proactive policing today.
Right.
Very briefly, could I just pick up very briefly?
Briefly, just because we have short time.
Right. Here's another element that may not be commonly known. We're talking here about the implicit statement about the federals kind of supervising and sort of monitoring activities of local police. This executive order, I call it a thing, frankly, is going to further sort of depress and make us all in law enforcement less efficient. And here's why: one nuance. People may not know, but in various jurisdictions in the country, local police have an immediate jurisdiction of a case. The federals have a broader purview. I always prided myself on working together with, for example, the San Jose PD, California, or San Francisco Police Department. And the cases I had oftentimes, especially in threat cases or in computer hacking and high-tech fraud cases, computer cases, would have tentacles across the country. So we jointly work together to develop probable cause, develop suspects in the immediate area, but then we can take that further to other jurisdictions by working together. With this executive order, I envision this depressing that, creating obstacles for that very important law enforcement purview.
Very good point. Excellent. Martin, let me go to you. With this one question, I'm going to close it up. If we have a few minutes afterwards, feel free for everybody to give some other thoughts. But we have about another 7 minutes or so. Martin, if this executive order is less than stellar, what should be done to rectify the issues of law enforcement engagement with the civilian? I'll word it that way, as diplomatically as I can.
So
Feel free to say nothing. Feel free to say everything is fine except the individual is bad. That's fine too.
Well, there are certain things that are in this executive order which govern behavior, and it doesn't govern the behavior of the people who are breaking the law. It governs the behavior of the people who are trying to enforce the law and protect the public. So, for instance, always there with a page. So in section 10, restricting no-knock entries. That is when search warrants are being obtained. That's what a search warrant is: a piece of paper that a judge signs where the police have asked to go into a place where they're not ordinarily allowed to go because of privacy guarantees of the Constitution. So that's a search warrant. They're going to look for something or somebody, evidence of a crime or whatever, contraband or a person. So what section 10 says in part is they talk about limiting the use of no-knock entries, which is going towards taking away the capability of the officers executing the warrant when they know or have really good reason to believe that there'll be somebody. If we knock on the door and say, police, do you mind opening the door for us? That will give plenty of time for somebody to get on the other side of the door and say, yeah, it's unlocked, come on in, and blast us. So restricting this once in a great while, out of hundreds of thousands of search warrants issued and executed. Sometimes something goes wrong, but limiting no-knock warrants as a result of one thing that went wrong one place that made it to the news, and it's on the front cover of whatever. This is silly. We don't, if a doctor prescribes the wrong medicine once, we don't take away the prescription pads of all of the doctors, do we? So some of this is to appease, I guess. It's an overreaction, in my opinion. And another thing that I'll say in here is that we have on page 20 support for criminals, in my opinion, and because it says, and it's particularly talking about people who are being released from prison. So I understand they've served their time or they're being let out for some reason. But it says facilitating reentry into society of people with criminal records, including sealing and expunging criminal records and giving people back the right to vote if they've lost it because of their criminal behavior. But going back to sealing or expunging criminal records, so it tells us that the president wants us to work on doing that. Now it talks about the feasibility of this and that and the other thing. Of course, we evaluate feasibility before we do things. So as Mark and Larry both addressed, there's no specificity in here. So I would like to know if criminal records of any sort, behavioral records, your permanent record in school, all of this, why do we even have this? Well, it's because prior behavior informs the potential of future behavior. That's why we keep records on people. So specifically, will we be sealing or expunging the criminal records upon release of sex attackers, child abusers, terrorists, elder abusers, human traffickers, child killers, perhaps, because sometimes child killers get out of prison too. So it's not specific in here. And perhaps some records should be expunged or sealed or limited access. But why are we giving, why is this going on? I live and die by my record. We want equity, and the word equity is mentioned throughout here. So I want equity too. So if you go to my police department, my former police department, where I was for 25 years, and you look at my record, it's there. Even though I retired 13 years ago, there are still records of my having been there and things that I did well and things that I didn't do well. So why exactly are we facilitating the elimination of records of criminals?
It appears to me, I know, spending all the time in Washington that I do, focused on the whole variety of issues that the Gold Institute for International Strategy focuses on, all too often we see this rush to create new legislation. We're going to create new legislation, so therefore this never happens again, that we can't have it happen again. And I look at these policymakers, these lawmakers, and I say, in reality, if the laws that are already on the books were followed, this would never have happened, and therefore we wouldn't be having this conversation. Stop making new laws. Stop writing these executive orders, but rather let's focus on what is already there. No one is suggesting that there aren't bad apples across the in law enforcement. It happens. We see that shockingly. I know it's difficult to realize this, to understand this, but we have bad apples in Congress and in an administration. We've had presidents resign from office. We've had members of Congress who have been chastised on the House floor. It happens, shockingly. So it could happen in law enforcement, but is it as extreme and as widespread as this executive order suggests? And I would say I would say no after listening to you. So let's, we have another 3 minutes. Mark, let me give you 60 seconds. Larry, 60 seconds, and Martin, and then we'll close it out.
How about an executive order to use the laws that are on the book already? Like you said, a lot of politicians would lose their jobs. They wouldn't know what to do, right? No,
Exactly.
I think in all seriousness, I believe that if the country as a whole, our local politicians, state politicians, and national politicians want to have a positive impact on policing, they have to be pragmatic. They have to use some common sense. And yes, they have to reach out to the men and women who are working the job day in and day out to see what their needs are. And that would be a first good step in the right direction. And then reach out to the community leaders to see what their needs are as well, with respect to providing safe and secure neighborhoods in their community.
Thank you, Larry.
Yes, I'm struck by all the comments, and I'm bringing together here almost 49 years of what I hope is some wisdom, some experience. We're all patriots, and we all want to do the right thing. And I think that when you look at something like this particular executive order, I would offer that they're probably somewhere in there, they care, the writers, the administration cares about the safety and the security of the folks that they're representing. The problem is, to get there, they're not being entirely fair. Very quickly, I think they've leveraged a couple of flashpoint issues that have sort of galvanized the attention of the country. And on those few instances, which represent really a very small percentage, they're trying to paint a broad brush and invoke legislation based on that emotion, based on that outrage, based on those very few. I agree, we need to have a more empirical, thoughtful study, look at the data for what it really says, and then judiciously and responsibly create laws and create orders.
Thank you, Martin.
If we're going to put together a national database of police behavior that is open, as it says, open to the public, I would love to see the equal treatment of doctors, congresspersons, elected officials. Let's make sure that there is a public database that I can look at and look at their potential misconduct. And as Mark beautifully put out, undefined. And last point, we have, if things like these are produced, they do need empirical evidence, and they're also the evidence and the information has to be 100% accurate. It has to be 100% accurate and verified. It cannot be what I read on Twitter. It cannot be. It has to be 100% accurate. 2 days ago, the Washington Post, on the anniversary of George Floyd's death, published that he was shot and killed by the police while in police custody. No, never happened. Now, they retracted it, but it was out there. It was published. So we have to be really careful of the foundation of our actions.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you all for joining me, Mark, Martin, Larry. This is an extremely important conversation. You know, what I have heard, I've heard a couple things, and some of and number one is that we really need to focus on what the issues are and leave the political agendas out of the equation. We have to, when engaging at all levels of government, it's important, it's imperative that we interact with those on the ground, so the people such as yourselves, members of law enforcement, active duty, retired. That if I may say so myself, this is somewhat of a biased opinion since we're all colleagues at the Gold Institute. Reach out to people like the three of you who interact on a daily, almost daily basis with law enforcement from across the country. So you have a good sense as to what's happening on the ground across the country. It does not replace talking to the individual who is the individual active duty member, but it certainly is a good start. And then really think about, what are we trying to accomplish by creating executive orders such as this? Is it going to help at all? And I would suspect that currently, after reading this executive order, after talking to you, that it really does not have the impact that it should. As you're watching this video, I encourage you to read the executive orders, print them out, pull them up on the screen. Martin has sorted for almost every one of his comments. He's cited each page and each portion of it. Mark and Larry as well referenced specific areas. Look at it and tell me what you think. What are some of your thoughts on this executive order? I don't expect everybody to agree to every point made. You might have your own opinions, but this is certainly a good start and a good representation of the perspective of law enforcement. I thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Take
John.
care, guys.